Hello, my name is Katrina Cochrane. I've been a specialist assessor and trainer for over 20 years now. I started off as a secondary English teacher and quickly retrained to be a specialist teacher and assessor of children and adults. I was head of education at the British Dyslexia Association before setting up my own company, Positive Dyslexia Ltd. I'm passionate about raising awareness for parents of dyslexic children and hope that this short video will give you some top tips that I have gleaned along the way. So if you are listening today, there may be a couple of reasons why you've wanted to access this recording. It may be that you know your child is dyslexic and want to find out more. And you might have had an assessment done, and we'll talk about that in a bit of time. You might suspect your child is dyslexic and you really don't know where to start. And it can be a long and difficult journey. And hopefully some of these tips will help you along that journey. So what has led you to suspect dyslexia? If you haven't had an assessment already, what's led you to think about dyslexia? Well, obviously, COVID has had an enormous impact on children. Some children did enjoy COVID and like the time at home. They may not have been good at communicating in school, and they actually enjoyed that period of time at home being taught by parents. Homeschooling, though, didn't suit everybody. And many children, dyslexic and non-dyslexic children, have not achieved where they should have been achieving by now. There may be a family history and you may have dyslexia running right through your family. And so that has led you to suspect dyslexia. Or it may be that you've got a screening result from school and it may have picked up an at-risk of dyslexia. And you may have them been advised to seek further advice and perhaps get a full assessment done. So lots of reasons why you may be at this point. So I've put together a few of my top tips for you all to think about. If you do suspect dyslexia, then the best thing to do is to make an appointment with your child's SENCO. Every school has to have a SENCO, a special educational needs coordinator. Now, they may bring in an educational psychologist at this point, but I have to say, because of my slide there, pigs may fly, there just are not enough educational psychologists around. And so it's very, very rare that an educational psychologist will be brought in. I think the main thing to do at this point is to see what the school will put in place. Now, it may be that they have got very good resources, that they've got very good people to put these things in place, and give the school a chance to put some things in place. There's no quick fix with dyslexia, and it may take a bit of time. So give them at least a term and then make an appointment at the end of that period of time to then discuss what the progress has been made. If there has been progress, then you might not want to proceed any further. If there hasn't been, you may then want to think about what you want to do next. But many children never get an assessment, a formal diagnosis of dyslexia. Around about 80% of students remain undiagnosed until they get to university, when they are picked up for disabled students allowance. But these are really large numbers who go all the way through school without any kind of formal assessment. First thing I would check is hearing and vision. If you've got any thoughts that your child might be dyslexic, have they had a history of ear infections? Have they had glue ear, grommets fitted? Any of those things may be preventing them hearing the pure sounds correctly. With vision, check simple things like, is the print jumping around on the page? Do you find the white paper glares if it's black print? Those simple questions can really give you a lot of information. And for many children, they think the print jumps about for everybody. Now, it's not every child, and it's not every child with dyslexia will have visual difficulties, but it's one of the first things that we ask parents to do before any kind of assessment. But it's good practice anyway. If they do have difficulties with vision, then it may be that a tracking line like this, a reading ruler, something like this may help them considerably. So number three, think about what you can do to support your child at home. I know that many dyslexic children have no concept of time at all. They don't understand what, they can't tell a clock, actually, a conventional clock. And many adults actually can't read a conventional clock either. So help them with time. Obviously, we've got things like mobile phones now, so it's not so important to be able to tell the time on a conventional clock, but it is very important. And even thinking about my own son, who's an adult, and I talked to him last weekend about coming back the week after next. And he said, Mum, you know, I don't understand what the week after next is. So everything else, he's very compensated, but he still doesn't have an idea about time in that way. It may be that your child might need a visual timetable to help them with their timing, or a vision timetable if they're studying. Lots of things you can do to support your child at home, particularly making your home dyslexia friendly. And I think that's really important, creating that dyslexia friendly environment at home. You want to find a quiet, dedicated area for homework. Make sure the lighting in that area isn't too harsh. Make sure that it's the same area every time for their homework. Make sure they've got a range of resources available that can really help them. So those overlays that I talked about, having a selection of those, maybe some fiddle tools that they can work with, maybe some duplicates, so that if they have forgotten their pencil case, and I do find that dyslexic children are the biggest procrastinators, and they will put off doing their homework if they can. So if they say to you, oh, I've left my pencil case at school, you've got a spare. It may be that your child is absolutely exhausted when they get back from school, and that's perfectly normal. These children are using so much energy to be able to keep up with their friends because of their slow processing, that by the time they get back home, they are absolutely exhausted. But very important that you don't do too much for your child. And that's very easy for me to say. But we don't want these children to have learnt helplessness. We want them to be independent learners. So whatever you can do to put the ball in their court is really, really helpful. Now, it might be that something like this, like a checklist before they go out of the door, would be very helpful as well. So if, for example, they've got PE kit that they need to remember on a Wednesday, they can tick that off that they've remembered their own PE kit. And it gives them a sense of ownership. It's really good practice. It may be that they need to have just an ordinary checklist, remembering their lunchbox, bringing it home instead of bringing it home at the end of the month when it smells absolutely foul. These are things that they need to remember, and they need to remember their own strategies as well. At home, there are lots that you can do to help them with, for example, reading. Or even simple things like helping with the alphabet. Buying some wooden alphabet letters like this is very cheap, probably, I think, less than £10 to have a whole set of wooden alphabet letters, and using them to teach things like open and closed syllables, teaching the pure sounds of the alphabet, teaching them the sequence of the alphabet, teaching them what the vowel is, teaching them what the consonant is, and then working on things like open and closed syllables in time. So there are lots of things that you can do at home, and there's some really good resources like Toe by Toe, for example, that you do 10 minutes at a time with your child at home, and it really, really helps. As much as you can, try and make things multisensory. And in school, a good teacher will make things multisensory in the way that they are teaching as well. You want things to be visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. So, for example, the child on the beach, for example, doing the alphabet there, It is kinesthetic because they're actually writing in the sand. If they're saying the letters and seeing the letters, it's visual and auditory. So great things, using your holiday to make things multisensory. Teach things like vocabulary. If a child isn't picking up their vocabulary through reading, they've got to pick it up in different ways. So it may be that you have a word of the day, for example, and in the car to school, think about using that word in the car. Think of it in a sentence, think of it in at the end of the day as well. Have you remembered it? Adapt things like commercial games. So you could use something like Snakes and Ladders to help with understanding how many syllables there are in a word. If the child gets it right, they go up the ladder. If they get it wrong, they go down the snake. I always advise children with dyslexia to try and learn to touch type. And there are programs that are free, like the BBC Dance Mat, that are excellent. And these children, particularly if they have got illegible handwriting, really need to have touch typing as their normal way of working. So using things like holidays to learn to touch type is really, really helpful. There are some very good commercial touch typing programs as well, like Touch Type Read and Spell or English Type Junior and Senior. But the free one, BBC Dance Mat, perfectly good. Use digital books. Like the Calibre Audio Library is free, and that's excellent. So you just have to say you're dyslexic and you can have free membership of that. And that's a wonderful resource. We really don't want to make homework a battle, do we? And again, that's very easy for me to say, but I have been there. Think about having some kind of downtime before starting homework so that they can relax a little bit and understand that they are shattered. Could you scribe for them, for example? Could you take the weight off them in a piece of writing by doing the scribing for them? Could they speak into Dragon software and it transcribe for them? So think about things that make it easier for your child. Not all children need a formal assessment, and it's very important to weigh up whether or not your child actually does need that formal diagnostic assessment. Think about it, but it's not the be all and end all. And I do advise parents who talk to me that having a diagnostic assessment may not make that much difference, depending on the age of the child. So, for example, a child who's in year 10 will get tested in school for exam access arrangements. And so it's not necessarily a good use of your money to have an assessment done in year 10. It may be that the money's better spent on tuition with a specialist. It may be having that piece of paper which has got that diagnosis is not so important as actually having that specialist tuition, if you've got a pot of money, to really help your child reach their potential. So think about formal assessment, but it may not be the be all and end all. If you have that formal assessment, don't think things are going to change in school. And I do warn parents that they do need to be careful. Don't go into the Senko waiving this formal assessment and say, what are you going to do now? Are they going to get an EHCP, Educational Health and Care Plan? Are they going to get this, that, and the other? They may not. Things may not change for your child, even though you've spent quite a lot of money on a private assessment. Some of the screeners are very good. So a screener like Nessie could be the way to get an idea whether or not your child is dyslexic, and it will give you a little report with suggestions as well. I think it's actually very important as a parent to realise that you're not on your own. Think about joining a local support group. And the British Dyslexia Association have a list of all the local support groups in your area, so you can find out if there's one local to you. And many of them have speakers, many of them have, they can do screening, they can do assessments. The Adult Dyslexia Centre, for example, have a parents course they run regularly, and that's brilliant. So these are quite cheap fairly cheap. They normally run for about 6 sessions, and we'll discuss things like helping a child with reading, spelling, maths, all of those different things. You can join Facebook groups. And there are things like Pinterest that have excellent things on there as well. So the main thing is to think that you're not on your own. Don't be isolated. Join one of these groups and meet other parents who are in the same boat. So number 9, I think, is trust your instincts as a parent. So many parents say to me, they felt it in their gut that their child was dyslexic. The school didn't necessarily believe them. Lots of schools say to me, I really didn't think that child was dyslexic. They weren't even on my radar. Particularly if your child is well behaved, particularly if your child isn't the worst in the class. Lots of teachers say that to me. Well, they can't be dyslexic because they're not the worst in the class. Trust your instincts as a parent. If you know your child better than anybody else. So if you do think that your child is dyslexic, do something about it. But also don't take no for an answer. Get your research together, maybe get the results of a screener like Nessie, go into the Senko, be calm, don't be confrontational. Even though this is a very emotional time for you as a parent, try and be calm and see what the school will put in place. But don't be fobbed off. Schools are under a lot of pressure because they don't have the budgets to support children in the way that they want to support them. But there's lots that they can do. So stand your ground and don't take no for an answer. And 10 as well, 2 10s. I think there's a bit of a movement at the moment about the fact that children, or if you're neurodiverse, you have a superpower. And actually, I think that's quite dangerous because not all children have a superpower. It would be lovely, but I think it does put a lot of pressure on children. And, I heard of a child recently who burst into tears because she said, my mother keeps telling me I've got superpower, but I don't. I'm just me. We don't necessarily want our child to be Richard Branson, actually. So be very aware that it's quite okay to be Clark Kent. You don't have to be Superman. However, most of these children are late developers. And we need to play on their strengths, not their weaknesses. Often schools don't know about a child's achievement out of school. They only know about that child in school. So make sure that they get the praise for things that they do out of school. And also recognise that sometimes being allowed to fail in a safe environment is okay. So it's okay to fail sometimes, and success will come out of failure. Even if your child doesn't get an education, health and care plan, even if they don't get exam access arrangements, don't give up. They may still be eligible for disabled students allowance and access to work when they get into employment. Different criteria, different funding streams, but there still may be things available for them later on. And then finally, give yourself a pat on the back. You are great parents. You're doing the best job you can in difficult circumstances. It's really, really hard, isn't it? And I know myself from my own son. I'd love to say I was a brilliant parent to my own son. He wasn't diagnosed until he was 18. I missed it in my own son too. So what you're doing is great. Look at all the resources that are out there. Look at all the things that you can do at home with your child, and they will succeed. It may take time. As I say, they're normally late developers, but they will get there. And part of the things that I do, there are lots of things that I do to help parents. So I put on a conference every year. I have a lot of recordings that will help parents So I've got recordings made by experts such as Val Muter, Anna Barnett, Professor Anna Barnett. All of these things are on my website to help with phonics, executive functioning, assessment, handwriting. All of those things can be accessed from my website. So there is lots out there. And I'm always very, very happy to email parents back and discuss support for their child. So do email me back at katrina@positivedyslexia.co.uk. So thank you very much for listening, and see you again soon. Thank you.